The London system is the easiest opening to learn in the game of chess, and that's why it can be so unimaginably dangerous. In today's video, I'm going to walk through exactly why you need to give this overlooked opening a chance in your games. But first of all, let's get all of the misconceptions out of the way. When you think of the London system, what's the first thing that comes to mind? In case you're living under a rock, here's a few things I hear getting thrown around a lot. The London system is boring. It's a passive opening that lets black off too easily. It will mostly lead to drawn games, your elo will stagnate if you play it, and grandmasters don't play the London. I started playing chess just over 2 years ago, and in that time I've played 10,692 games. I've won 55%, lost 39%, and drawn just 6% of those 10,000 games. And for reference, my rapid elo stands at over 2,200 at the time of this recording. Okay, so we can probably all agree that the London system doesn't only lead to drawn games, but what about the rest of its problems? To answer that question, we need to go all the way back to the start. The London system has a terrible reputation, especially online. It's perceived as a thoughtless opening, in which the player with the white pieces can throw the same sequence of moves on the board in every game with no consequences. This could be the case for anyone below 1000 elo, but as your opponents start getting stronger, white has decisions to make even as early as move 2. Let me show you what I mean. Obviously, all of these instances are going to begin with d4, but what if black immediately plays c5? This is called the Old Benoni defense, and playing the immediate bishop f4 is extremely subpar, blundering a small advantage to black on a low depth engine. Of course, technically this does transpose out of the London system, but you don't really have an option as white here. You're forced to play the Old Benoni, even if you intended on playing the London. We'll come back to the Old Benoni defense later, but first let's have some fun. In 2014, Grandmaster Kamsky vs Grandmaster Sam Shankland at the Eastern Class Championship. Kamsky had a classical elo of 2,709 at the time and primarily used the London system with the white pieces. The game went like any other until on move 12, where Kamsky played the seemingly innocent d takes c5. This seems like an extremely tame move, but the following sequence was anything but. Shankland took this pawn with his queen, immediately forfeiting a plus 1.2 advantage to the white pieces. Kamsky immediately sacrifices his bishop with bishop takes h7, to which Sam Shankland captures this bishop and is met with queen h5 check. Shankland only has one move in this position, and that is king g8, but now Kamsky comes with knight e4, and you can't take this knight because the queen would hang on the other side. Shankland's queen is now under attack, so he has to move it, and he does by playing queen c4, but now Kamsky plays knight g5, and it's very clear that black has some serious problems. Black needs to play rook fd8, allowing queen takes f7 check, king h8, queen h5 check, king g8, and rook d1. Black might be up material momentarily here, but white has a +2 advantage on the evaluation. This trap has been played multiple times previous to this 2014 bout, but it was popularized by Kamsky as the Kamsky Trap. If a game like this can occur between two 2700s, imagine what's possible at the amateur level. But let's be real. Dynamics like that aren't going to happen every time you play the London system. The London system is very precise. On many occasions, you'll need to convert endgames with the smallest of margins. But the idea that the London system is boring is flat out incorrect. The reason that people think that the London system is boring is because they simply don't know how to play it. It's easier to label the opening as boring than to admit that other people are better at chess than you are. So, how do you really play the London system? In less than 15 minutes, I'm going to show you how to keep your London system dynamic and all of the tricks black will use to diffuse its potential. Just a disclaimer, I'm aware that some of these technically aren't the London system. However, I want to cover every opening that allows a London system setup. For this, I want to centralize the board so you can imagine the moves as if you were playing them. Let's look at d5 as a response first. After bishop f4, black will already pose a threat with knight f6, that threat being knight h5 and attempting to trade off white's strong bishop. Although knight f3 is possible, e3 is the superior option in my opinion, temporarily holding the h5 square with the queen and opening up the light squared bishop. If black strikes with c5, calmly respond with c3. Note that if black ever releases tension in the center by playing c takes d4, you almost always want to recapture with the e3 pawn. This theme applies in almost all similar positions to this. White wants to castle kingside, and opening up the e-file accommodates a half-open file for the rook and allows rook lift potential. Similarly, if black ever plays g6, you should almost always play h3. We spoke before about black attempting to play knight h5, but as g6 prepares to fianchetto black's dark squared bishop, it also adds protection to the h5 square. It's incredibly important to not allow black to seize control of diagonals in the London system. We've covered most of the important things already, so let's skip forward a few moves and complete our setup. In any kind of position in the London system, a primary goal should be breaking in the center with the move e4. Sometimes it's not possible, but if you can do it, do it. White is not yet winning, but now that the e-file is open, the rook can occupy it. Eventually, rook lifts will be threatened, and you can create an attack on the black king, literally however you like. But what if breaking for e4 isn't possible? Well, eventually if e4 isn't possible for you, black will play e5 themselves. You can allow these trades to eventually break with either e4 or c4, opening up lines for your rooks. Games can literally go thousands of ways from this point on. You might play the most painfully positional game in existence, or you'll end up in an impossibly tactical late middle game. There are quite literally infinite possibilities. But let's go back for a moment. On move 3 for black, e6 is a quite common response. The idea is to create a queenside fianchetto and quickly develop the dark squared bishop. In these positions, it's important to delay the natural knight f3, instead you should opt for bishop d3. If black challenges your bishop with bishop d6, let them. You can either play c3 or knight d2 in this position. If black takes your bishop, recapture with the e3 pawn and open up the massively important e-file. If queen d6, g3, you shouldn't worry about weakening the light squares here, because black's light squared bishop is on the back rank sleeping. Of course, black will try to strike with c5 at some point, seizing some central control. Just ignore this. If they play c takes d4, recapture with knight takes d4. In this position, you boast the open e-file, extremely active pieces, and a bastion on e5 for a knight to eventually arrive on. Again, attack in this position however you please. If black ever breaks with e5, you happily play against an isolated queen pawn structure. Going back a few moves, you might be wondering why not bishop g3? The main issue I have with bishop g3 is that you can't really castle. Literally, regardless of how you play, eventually you'll have to either take the bishop on d6 or castle and allow your pawns to be doubled. This isn't losing by any means, but it leads to the boring positions people talk about and makes it difficult to continue posing threats. Keeping your bishop on f4 and opening up the e-file if black chooses to break the tension between the bishops is a much stronger plan. Now let's look at f5 as a response. We'll very quickly look at the Dutch defense, mainly because a lot of the themes are similar to that of d5. First, get your light square bishop outside the pawn chain with bishop f4. Knight f6 will most likely arrive, but keep things simple with e3. A common move for black here is e6, opening the possibility of bishop d6. Here, just play knight f3. In the Dutch defense, knight h5 can be met with bishop g5 as the f7 pawn has been overextended. If black tries with bishop d6, trade off in the center and follow up with c4. White enjoys this position literally 10 times out of 10. You play against black's bad bishop and slowly bring forward an attack. You can play f4 at some points and lift the rook above the king's pawns with rook f3. But again, there are so many ways to play this and go after black's king. Properly and accurately rerouting your knights is extremely important, and so is understanding when to trade off your bishop for a black knight to really take advantage of black's bad bishop. If we go back and black delays the dark square bishop trade, white still enjoys the majority of activity with c4. I found h3 to be an extremely useful move when black attempts to burrow down like this, opening the door to play g4 at certain moments, castling queenside, and absolutely hammering black's king. If you do choose to go down that path, it requires extreme precision and calculation. You need to make sure your attack comes first before black's counterattack, or you'll lose your advantage. If you don't want to play so ambitiously but still want to play in the driver's seat, we're actually not even in the Dutch defense anymore. We've transposed to more of a queen's pawn opening, very similar to a d5 response. You can go for a regular London system-esque setup here and apply similar concepts, with opening the e-file a major objective. Now let's look at g6 and knight f3 as a response. This one will be extremely quick, as there's not a whole lot of new concepts to be explained against these passive setups for black. After knight f6, it's important we play knight f3, adding extremely necessary defense to our d4 pawn to ensure that once we develop our bishop, queen b6 can never fork our pawns. A common move here is c5, but here we can play c3. After black plays d5, this will transpose into favorable positions we've already looked at with bishop f4 to come for white. If instead of c5, g6 is played, we simply develop our bishop to f4. This does allow knight h5, but it's the only opportunity to develop our bishop outside of the pawn chain unless you want to play some sort of call system setup and play bishop b2. If knight h5 does arrive, play bishop g3 and allow yourself to recapture with the h-pawn, opening up your rook. If instead they play bishop g7, play h3 to ensure the bishop stays on the board. This still generally transposes into what we've already looked at, however, after bishop g7 and h3, black can play d6. This threatens to strike at the center with e5, but we can just play e3. Typically in these positions, white is extremely happy and never really has to worry about e5 because the option is too double-edged for black. However, there is one line worth mentioning. After the moves castles, bishop e2, knight bd2, castles, rook e8, and c3, black can attempt to play knight h5. This move attacks our important bishop whilst discovering the bishop's site of the crucial e5 square. Here we can play bishop h2, and even though we allow e5 after d takes e5 and d takes e5, white still enjoys an advantage as the black pieces are extremely disorganized. Eventually, knight c3 should be played for white, the rooks should come to the c and d files, and white dominates black with piece activity. Now let's look at c5 as a response. We touched on the old Benoni defense earlier on, and it's a bit of a tricky opening because if you want to keep the theme of a London setup, you need to respond with c3 instead of e3. This is because our bishop isn't developed yet and we don't want to box it inside of our pawn chain. After we play c3, black will probably play knight f6. It's very important we play knight f3 here before we bring out our bishop. We mentioned this earlier on, but we need to ensure that once our bishop is developed, queen b6 can never be a fork of our d4 and b2 pawns. For example, if bishop f4 before knight f3, queen b6 is possible. This swings the game entirely into black's favor, as you are now forced to respond to black's threats. After knight f3, d5 will be played by black. This transposes into lines we've already looked at, with bishop f4 to come for white. This is how you play the London system. Of course, when I say this, I don't speak on behalf of professional players that do this for a living, but I certainly speak on behalf of every amateur and advanced chess player that plays the London system. Playing the London system in this fashion will lead to exciting and advantageous games. The London system is boring only if you don't know how to play it. To finish off this video, I want to show a game of mine in which I played with the London system setup. I definitely don't want to glorify the London system as this ultra-attacking opening where you have infinite dynamics, but I do want to show that if you play the right moves, you'll have strong attacking chances. This game is only 20 moves long, and the whole point I'm showing you this game is to show that if you don't respect the London system, it can end very badly, very quickly. My opponent decides to go for the Dutch defense in this game, and this is where a lot of people don't like London players because bishop f4 can just be played. People think that it's this systematic opening where you can play it against everything, but if you actually look at all of the engine lines, every single one slightly prefers white in this position, even though we are so early. Of course, at really high depth engines, they're going to say it's completely even, but white just enjoys this opening a lot more than black. Of course, black plays the standard knight f6, but we don't rush with knight f3 because that runs into knight h5, bishop g5, h6, and then you need to play bishop d2, which the engine doesn't dislike. It thinks that you've made enough complications on this side of the board, enough overextensions, but from a practical standpoint, if you are an amateur or just an advanced player, I really don't think this is practical. I much prefer instead to play e3, which is what I did in the game. This now holds the h5 square, and instead of playing knight h5, which is now impossible, black opts for e6. Now you have the option of bringing your bishop to d6. You can also fianchetto your bishop, bring your other pieces out, fianchetto this bishop, and in response to this, I just play bishop d3. Again, we are delaying this move, although this move is actually possible now because after knight h5, we can play bishop g5 immediately, and we can threaten to trade off these bishops. You can't play h3 because we're hitting the queen, we come with tempo. Instead, I play bishop d3, and black plays a pretty bad move here and plays the move d5, and the reason that this is so bad is because it immediately gives black a bad bishop. You could say that our bishop is also bad because it's staring into this, but at least ours has some attacking potential. If we play g4 at some point, this bishop becomes open, but no matter what you do with your bishop, it's always going to stare into your own pawns and be a bad bishop. We spoke about this earlier in the video, and that's why white has a slight advantage here. I continue to get some of my pieces out. I play knight f3, black plays knight bd7, and now I play h3, and the idea is that you want to springboard with g4. I said that you don't have to do this, you can just play against this bad bishop and still enjoy a pretty nice advantage, but if you do want to go all-out attack, you can play g4, because the reality is, with this bishop on this side of the board, the likelihood of black castling this way is very slim, so you can expect them to castle short. Black goes on to play bishop e7, which very much indicates that they are looking to castle short. I play knight b d2, bringing the last piece out, and after they play h3, I thought they were going to play g5, but this doesn't really make much sense either because they're not going to castle this way. It just takes too long. Their king's going to stay in the middle of the board for far too long for this to be a real option. So I was pretty sure they weren't going to play that, so I was happy to play c3, and as you can see, even though we have played against the Dutch defense, we have literally got the exact same London system structure that you would expect from any London system game. We can go a little bit quicker now that we've got the opening out of the way. My opponent castles, I play knight e5, and after a bunch of trades come off the board, we end up with this bishop on e5, and this knight jumps into e4, and we've got not only a decent bishop against a really bad bishop for black here, but we've just got an absolute titan of a bishop in the center of the board that is going to come in very useful later on. I continue by playing queen e2. I just want to castle long here. There probably were stronger options here. I think g4 was probably a stronger option, but I wanted to play this game slowly. I knew that I already had the advantage and all of the attacking opportunities were going to be in my hands. So I played queen e2, and black comes straight away with c5, which is a common move. They want to come at your king because they're pretty sure that you're probably going to castle this way. It's the only way that white can get an advantage is by trying to castle long. But I just respond with rook g1, and I want g4 to be played. I want some pawns to come off the board. I want my rook to be open. I want to castle, double my rooks, and this is just an unstoppable attack eventually for white. Black plays a bit of a slow move here, playing bishop d7, trying to connect the rooks and maybe make this bishop a little bit better than it already is. But we go straight for the kill with g4, but I get a little bit of a dilemma here because black plays the move c4. Now my bishop is attacked, and if I take this, he's going to take me with tempo on my queen. And also, I was thinking, I can't really take this, because then he's going to take with the f pawn, and I don't get this file open. I've moved my rook to g1 to get it to an open file, and if that pawn, if these pawns don't get traded off for each other, I don't have that file open, and my attack is really slow. I have to respond by taking this pawn. I have to push g5 at some point, and then I have to castle, stack the rooks, and I thought this was too slow, so I had to think of something better. The move that I thought of was a brilliant move. It was g takes f, allowing them to take the pawn because you have this move. And they took back with the pawn. I have no idea why. They didn't even take my bishop, and I immediately come in with rook takes g7. I think you know how the game goes from here. This is a complete windmill. I took the bishop. There are better moves than taking the queen here, but I thought if I take the queen, there's absolutely no chance he gets back in the game. Realistically, you could also play this and play queen h5, but this is mate in 7. I wasn't about to calculate mate in 7 with 4 minutes on the clock, so instead I went for taking this queen and Very shortly later, Black resigned the game, and I won with the London system against the Dutch defense. The London system is not a perfect opening, but the idea that it's a bad or boring opening is just wrong. From Magnus Carlsen to Ding Liren, it feels like no matter how skilled a player is that wins with the London system, it will never get the respect it deserves. It might be the best opening for any beginner chess player. It can be aggressive, it can be precise, and it's insanely easy to learn. So why not try the London system?